Sydney Loofe, a Tinder match with murder. We've all done it. Swiped right, hoping for that spark, that connection, but what happens when a swipe takes you down a path you never imagined? What if that connection turns deadly? This is the story of Sydney Loofe and the Tinder match that ended in a nightmare. Sydney Loofe, a 24-year-old from Lincoln, Nebraska, was a young woman full of life. She worked at Menards, a local hardware store, and was loved by her friends, coworkers, and family. Sydney had an infectious smile that lit up the room and a quirky sense of humor that made her someone people naturally gravitated toward. She loved animals and was known for her love of adventure. But more than anything, Sydney had a big heart. She was the type of person who went out of her way to help others, always putting her loved ones first. She was a sister, a daughter, and a friend to many. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her. In interviews, Sydney's mother, Susie, spoke of her daughter's kind nature. "She was our sunshine," Susie said. "Sydney loved life and loved helping others. She was such a beautiful soul." Sydney's friends echoed these feelings, describing her as someone who could lift anyone's spirits, even on their darkest days. "You couldn't help but smile when you were around her," said one friend. "She made everything better." Like many young people, Sydney turned to Tinder in the hopes of meeting someone special. She matched with Bailey Boswell, a woman around her age who seemed fun and friendly. They chatted for a few days and things seemed to click. After exchanging messages, they arranged to meet for a date. Their first meeting went well, and Sydney felt hopeful that she had made a genuine connection. Little did she know that this connection would lead her into a deadly trap. On November 15, 2017, Sydney posted her final message on Snapchat. "Ready for my date," she wrote, alongside a smiling selfie. It was a typical post, something friends often do to share their excitement. But what Sydney didn't know was that this would be the last time she would ever communicate with the outside world. What Sydney didn't know was that Bailey Boswell wasn't who she appeared to be. Behind her friendly Tinder profile, Bailey was entangled in a deeply toxic relationship with her boyfriend, Aubrey Trail, a man with a dark and criminal past. Trail was no stranger to law enforcement. He had spent years involved in criminal activities, including fraud, theft, and exploitation. Trail was a master manipulator, known for scamming people out of money by posing as a rare coin dealer, and he had used these skills to control Boswell. Together, the two had concocted a sinister plan, one that would lure Sydney into their world of deceit and violence. Aubrey Trail had been in and out of the criminal justice system for years. He had a long history of run-ins with the law, from scamming people to selling counterfeit goods. But Trail's dark side went beyond mere fraud. He had a disturbing interest in controlling and exploiting others. His manipulative nature was something he had perfected over the years, and Boswell was one of his latest victims. Trail and Boswell's relationship was built on control, and together they sought out vulnerable women like Sydney to prey upon. When Sydney didn't return home after her date, her friends and family grew worried. This wasn't like Sydney. She always checked in with her friends, always let someone know where she was. But on that night, there was nothing. No text messages, no phone calls. By the next morning, when Sydney failed to show up for work at Menards, her family knew something was wrong. Sydney's friends immediately reported her missing to the police, and the investigation began. The search for Sydney was swift and determined. Local law enforcement worked alongside volunteers to retrace her last known steps. Investigators quickly focused on Bailey Boswell as a person of interest. After all, she had been the last person to see Sydney. Boswell and her boyfriend Aubrey Trail initially denied knowing what had happened to Sydney. In fact, Boswell posted a video on social media expressing concern for Sydney's disappearance, acting as though she were just as shocked as everyone else. But behind the scenes, investigators were closing in on the truth. For weeks, the search for Sydney continued. Family and friends held on to hope, but on December 4th, 2017, their worst fears were realized. Investigators found Sydney's dismembered body in rural Clay County, Nebraska, over 90 miles from her home. Her remains were discovered in several garbage bags, scattered across a field. The discovery was horrifying. Sydney had been brutally murdered, her body cut into pieces and dumped in a remote area. This discovery confirmed what many had feared. Sydney's life had been cruelly and violently taken. The discovery of Sydney's remains left the community shaken. Investigators now knew that they were dealing with a murder case. Sydney hadn't just disappeared. She had been killed in the most horrific way imaginable. The tools used to dismember her body would later be found on surveillance footage. Not long after discovering Sydney's body, police obtained surveillance footage from a Home Depot in Lincoln. The footage revealed Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail purchasing a hacksaw, bleach, and garbage bags, the very tools that had been used to dismember Sydney's body. The footage was recorded just hours after Sydney was last seen alive, and it provided investigators with the concrete evidence they needed to link Boswell and Trail directly to the crime. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Boswell and Trail had meticulously planned the murder. But when the trial began, Aubrey Trail's defense took a bizarre turn. Trail claimed that Sydney's death was part of a consensual sexual fantasy that had gone horribly wrong. He even suggested that he and Boswell were part of a witch cult that performed rituals. His erratic behavior during the trial raised many eyebrows, but investigators had no doubt about the real story. Trail's courtroom antics only further cemented his guilt. He frequently interrupted the trial, made strange accusations, and at one point even attempted to harm himself in front of the jury. His increasingly erratic behavior seemed to be a last-ditch effort to evade justice, but the overwhelming forensic evidence spoke louder than any of his claims. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in convicting both Boswell and Trail. Investigators found DNA evidence tying Sydney to the apartment the couple shared. Bloodstains on the floors, walls, and furniture indicated that a violent struggle had taken place. Sydney had been restrained and strangled before her body was dismembered. Additionally, investigators uncovered disturbing online searches made by both Boswell and Trail, searches for body disposal methods and other gruesome topics. This was no accident. Sydney's death had been planned from the start. The trial was emotionally devastating for Sydney's family, who had to sit through graphic and disturbing details of their daughter's final moments. In July 2019, Aubrey Trail was sentenced to death for his role in the murder, while Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though justice was served, the pain and loss felt by Sydney's loved ones will never fade. Sydney's mother, Susie, spoke after the sentencing, saying, "We lost a light in our lives, but we'll never let her memory fade. Sydney deserved so much more than what was taken from her." Sydney's tragic story serves as a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in the world of online dating. Behind every profile, there could be someone with far darker intentions. What begins with a swipe can quickly turn into a nightmare. Sydney's family, her friends, and her community continue to remember her for the bright, loving person she was, not for the cruelty of those who took her life. In the world of online dating, one swipe can change your life forever. For Sydney, that swipe led to her tragic end. Thank you for watching Swiping Out Loud. Join us next time as we uncover more stories of danger lurking behind the screen. And if you've had your own experience, share it in the comments below. Together, we can reveal the truth. Swipe carefully, because you never know who's on the other side.